Hello and welcome to the Fantasy Life Show. Happy Thursday, everybody. I'm your host, Ian Hartitz. It's a great day to be great. It's a great day to basically wrap up wide receiver week with some tiers and just, some more good questions to hopefully help you, a scholar, capture some fantasy championship glory this year. But assisting me as he does every single Thursday on the Fantasy Life Show, the one, the only Fantasy Life Director of Analytics, Dwain, the Rock McFarland. What's going on, Dwain?
What's up, Ian? Yeah, look, man, I put out a nice sleepers article yesterday, and half the players got hurt. So I don't know if people want me writing anything else. Maybe I should just stop writing, just record with you all day.
You could have 10 players that you love, Dwayne, but the second you pick, 4 or 5 of them to highlight, those guys are going to find a way to bust. That's fantasy football. I had, I think I was talking about some sleeper or whatever on Twitter, and someone's like, well, the thing is, I'm keeping them in my league this year. So because I'm doing that, they're going to bust. And that is how fantasy works, Dwayne. If you have played it long enough, bad things are going to happen to you. So much more on that. But yes, do check out Dwayne's sleeper article as much as, again, got a couple injuries. Those freaking fantasy injury guys never helping us out. Really great stuff, as always, from Dwayne. So much more on that here in just a little bit. But first, a quick word on Fantasy Life Plus. Fantasy Life Plus, Fantasy Life's premium product is, in my opinion, I do work for Fantasy Life after all, the best tool in the industry that you can get for, again, guys, less than the cost of a Chipotle burrito per month. Tier 2 subscription. You can even go cheaper than that. So still certainly helping you guys fish plenty. We got the content game, the podcast articles, all that stuff is still free. But if you are trying to, again, just take that extra step using our draft champion tool, the customizable mock draft feature with keepers, with dynasty settings, which is pretty hard to find out there. Awesome stuff there. And then also getting, just access to Dwayne's projections, all the rankings. And really, guys, what's going to be cool is the new and improved utilization report hub. I mean, as a content creator, it really is essential to my process. And, if you guys are trying to get a little bit smarter, I think it could be to yours as well. So again, Fantasy Life Plus, check it out. All right, Dwayne, as you mentioned, injury guys decided to be some dickheads on a Wednesday. It was not a great hump day for fantasy managers, particularly ones like you and me, who've been drafting a lot of Colts wide receiver Josh Downs this offseason. My sixth highest drafted wide receiver. He's not dead. That's the good news here, but he did suffer a high ankle sprain, expecting to miss 4 to 6 weeks. So rising second-year talent looked like it was honestly, Dwayne, and at least in my opinion, going to be potentially more of a 1A, 1B situation with Michael Pittman and Josh Downs than maybe people were giving it credit for. Now, though, is going to be at risk of missing that week 1 because as I'm looking at it, it is August 8th or 6th, something like that. And again, 4 weeks from now is going to put us right up against that week 1 deadline. So Josh Downs missing time. We did see Anthony Gold step in the slot, but if anything, Dwayne, look, Downs should be back earlier in the season, but high ankle sprain, not the sort of injury we're expecting him to necessarily come back from immediately at 100%. If he is going to miss a little bit of time, honestly, I don't think it really impacts the whole Edie Mitchell, Alec Pierce thing all that much. We might get a situation where it is Anthony Gold actually taking most of Downs' reps. However, the Michael Pittman target projections, those get interesting in a hurry.
Yeah, I mean, and Pittman's already shown us he's a wide receiver 1 when it comes to target earning. It's just how much can he really do with those targets, right? He's not a guy that can stretch the field out and do all these different things, or at least with the quarterbacks that he's played with, he's not been able to do that. So I'm not really changing anything here with the Colts. I took a half game away from Josh Downs and our projections. I'm going to update the ranks as soon as the show's over. I'll probably just drop him down a couple of spots in the tier we're in. I mean, it was still really encouraging what we saw for him last year. Obviously, an injury was a major factor for his season last year. But before week 9, when he had injured his knee, he was averaging 12 and a half fantasy points per game with a 21% target share. So that's wide receiver 3 territory. That's kind of where we were looking at him this year, drafting him more as a wide receiver 4, wide receiver 5, but hoping for wide receiver 3 upside. We might just have to wait a little bit for that. I think the biggest risk here is not that this injury completely lingers as long as they let him shut it down, right? That's the key. I think you want Josh Downs to shut it down completely until he's well. Whenever these things happen in the season and they have to try to play through the high ankle sprain, I think we've seen many times, right? These guys just, they struggle with it all year. So if the Colts are willing to give him the time, I would be willing to give up a game or two early in the season to then get Josh Downs back fully healthy. The problem, Ian, will be is that, training camp does matter. You're getting your rhythm down with your quarterbacks. Anthony Richardson's still a young quarterback. So it would really hurt the start of the season, not only from missing games, but I would expect it to take a little bit of time for then Josh Downs to be able to ramp back up, get fully integrated into the offense on a team that we know, Ian's not going to run a ton of 11 personnel. They've told us multiple times that they're going to be just like the old Colts. They're going to run multiple tight ends a lot. They want to come out in these heavy formations. So as much as we love Downs, there was already some risk built into his profile that he needs, the 3 wide receiver sets. In some games, you just don't get many of those. So I am going to move Downs down a little bit, but overall, this is not going to impact my outlook on him too much.
Already was cheap enough in drafts in the first place. I mean, looking at our ADP tool over on FantasyLife.com, pick 169 on ESPN, 143 on Sleeper, 131 on Yahoo. I mean, honestly, Dwayne, I'm hoping to have 5 wide receivers on my team already before I'm looking at guys like Downs. Certainly not someone that we would have, even before the injury, been able to say, oh, yeah, started him in week 1, no problems there at all. This is an offense that we're not exactly expecting a ton of fireworks from in the passing game in particular. I mean, Anthony Richardson is my second most drafted quarterback of the offseason. So we better be getting some fireworks in the run game. But Dwayne, I know your projections have the Colts as 26 in total pass attempts, 24th in passing yards, and 24th in passing touchdowns. I mean, again, Pittman, we have our, concerns there. 4 starts with Anthony Richardson under center, half PPR, wide receiver 7, 46, 95, and wide receiver 37 finishes. Not ideal there. But again, being paid like the number 1 should be the number 1. When we start to expect the number 2 guy to really emerge from a run first, probably low passing volume offense, that's where it does get a little bit more problematic. So most likely answer to which guy to really be targeting behind Michael Pittman, probably just no here. And I say this as someone who really does like A.D. Mitchell as a prospect, but, also doesn't exactly sound like that situation is all that resolved. Him and Alec Pierce still battling out on a day-to-day, instance in terms of trying to get that wide receiver 3 job.
Yeah, which is not ideal for A.D. Mitchell. I mean, no offense to the Alec Pierce family, but Alec Pierce has been pretty much terrible. I mean, he's not been good. He hasn't been able to earn targets like at all. So for A.D. Mitchell to then come in and struggle with overcoming Pierce, I don't want to say it's necessarily surprising, because we talked about the challenge for a guy like A.D. Mitchell is he's just never been consistent. Like when he flashes and you see it on film, you're like, oh my God, like this guy could be an alpha wide receiver 1. And then you don't see him again for a while. And you're like, where's A.D. Mitchell? And then all of a sudden he shows back up. So consistency has been an issue. We know the NFL coaches care about that. So it sounds like A.D. Mitchell still a work in progress. If I'm drafting another Colt wide receiver, though, as the third option, I'm still taking Mitchell. I'm not messing around with Pierce. And I know that's not what you're recommending here, but like he's just a guy that's never been able to do it. It just might take A.D. Mitchell a little bit longer to get on the field than what we had hoped for.
Just quickly, Dwayne, late round flyer now. They're probably going to have pretty similar ADPs. Josh Downs or A.D. Mitchell? I think I'm still taking Josh Downs.
Yeah, I'm going to keep them close. I mean, I had Josh Downs slightly ahead of A.D. Mitchell. I still think the upside is there for Mitchell. It just probably shouldn't expect it early in the season. I think A.D. Mitchell's a real candidate to get drafted in deeper leagues and get cut, and then end up being a waiver wire pickup like in week 5, 6, 7. He feels like that kind of profile to me right now. So maybe you just save your pick and don't worry about it. But I'm also not against it, because what if we're just wrong and he shows up on week 1 and blows up? Then you don't have to worry about spending all your fab money, because you know how it goes. Rookies that were taken in round 1 or 2 that somehow end up on a waiver wire, like you're gonna have to pay a lot of fab for them, because then it's like oh my God, what if this guy is just an absolute beast? So I mean, there's still merit to taking him. I will say in 14, 15 round drafts, like A.D. Mitchell's not a must draft.
How dare you imply we could be wrong, Dwayne? This is the year we're going 100%. All right. I don't want to hear any of that negativity. But
My bad.
again,
My
some
bad.
bad news on Josh Downs. But we did get some good injury news. Jets wide receiver. That's right. New York Jets wide receiver. Big Mike Williams is off the PUP list. And as he continues to, again, rehab from last year's torn ACL. So this was fairly expected. I mean, I think it happened last year in week 3. So it wasn't a late season issue like, Hawkinson and some of those other tight ends, Tyler Higbee, are forced to deal with. So week 1 was always in reach for Mike Williams, and it seems like he is on pace to potentially do just that. Of course, Garrett Wilson is still fully expected to be the wide receiver 1 for Aaron Rodgers, and Mike Williams, let's face it, not exactly someone that's overly been known for, being this dynamic, separator out there, is turning 30 in October, I believe, coming off the ACL. Would kind of make sense if we've already seen him play his best football. So Dwayne, Mike Williams, usually in best ball land, and I'm assuming redraft as well, coming off the board in that kind of wide receiver 55 to 65 range, like a true wide receiver 5, wide receiver 6, not costing you all that much. I would guess this move gets him a little bit of a bump. Are you buying? Because it is one of these situations where we could look up after week 2, week 3, and just be like, Oh, yeah, Mike Williams is a full-time wide receiver for Aaron Rodgers. Like there is, I guess, theoretical double-digit touchdown upside here.
Yeah, I mean, he was going too late, honestly, on Underdog. Like his latest ADP, like from like 2 days ago, was 64. So I mean, I've been ahead of ADP by like 10 to 12 spots most of the offseason, but I'm not going to move him again. I
Mhm.
think, I was just already really accounting for the fact that we knew it'd start off on the pup, probably have a slower start to the season. I'm guessing it'll be like week 5, 6, 7 before he's in a full-time role as one of the starting outside wide receivers. The depth chart for the Jets could force that. There's really not a lot behind Mike Williams. We know that Michael Corley is a rookie they're excited about getting involved around the line of scrimmage, but still raw as a route runner. Then after that, we've got like Xavier Gipson, Alan Lazard. You folks don't want me going on
Yeah.
about Alan Lazard again. I'm trying to refrain from that. So, yeah, I mean, there's not a ton of competition. So, I mean, there is a road to him perhaps getting a little bit more playing time earlier than we expected. But like he's still not going to be 100%. So I think it's probably mid-season before you're getting everything you want out of Mike Williams. So yeah, I think looking at him as anywhere from like a low end wide receiver 4, I think that's probably the max. Ian, I'm looking at my rankings right now. I think like the max you could do is press him up against like Tyler Lockett. I've got Tyler Lockett as my wide receiver 51, mainly due to age and the fact that his underlying data points have really fallen off. So
Yeah.
Mike Williams, 2 years younger than him, but dealing with, obviously coming off of a severe injury. So if I were to push him up a tier, well, I've got Mike Williams in tier 17 right now, so I could get him to 15, right? And that's a difference of
Yeah.
like 7 players. So I still, even if things are going really well for him in camp, I don't anticipate making much of a change here.
Him, Tyler Lockett, even Brandon Cooks kind of in that similar tier where you can
Yeah.
see it, but we certainly do have some red flags with the age.
I've
And
got him
again,
ahead of
especially
Cooks.
in Mike's case. Okay.
Yeah, I've got him ahead of
As long
Cooks.
as
So yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
I was saying, as long as CeeDee Lamb stays sidelined, though, we'll talk about that more. Brandon Cooks is on the up and up. But again, I'm not trying to necessarily take away from Mike or Cooks. I don't think it's the worst tier in the world, Dwayne. Again, there are some red flags with both guys, but they could get there. Now, all that said, guys like Romeo Dobbs, Rashid Shaheed, even Khalil Shakur, I would be taking those guys ahead of these veterans.
Yeah, and I mean Brandon Cooks has definitely shown more of the signals that we are worried about. Like we've been 2 years straight now of him being down in a downward trend, versus man coverage, all of his target earning, all those sort of things. He's going into his age 31 season. I feel like Brandon Cooks is probably done. Like the only time I'm taking Brandon Cooks this year in fantasy is if I'm playing best ball and I have Dak and I want to throw him on a stack for the most part. So I would take Mike Williams ahead of him. But yes, for sure, I think you should be taking Josh Palmer, Rashid Shaheed, Khalil Shakir, Romeo Dobbs. All those guys should be going ahead of Mike Williams and Brandon Cooks.
Speaking of Romeo Dobbs, Jordan Love said that if he is getting married, who would he trust with his rings at the wedding? And he says he's going to trust Romeo, man. So maybe it's more of the romantic sentiment of the name Romeo, but I happen to think it's because Romeo Dobbs is his favorite wide receiver 1. There's another interview this offseason where he was, drawing up a perfect play. I think it was on CJ Stroud and Micah Parsons' show. And Jordan Love put Romeo Dobbs out there at X wide receiver. So do not be sleeping on the rising third-year talent out there in Green Bay. Speaking of the Packers, Dwayne, some good news on Josh Jacobs. I mean, this is a guy who a couple of weeks ago was dealing with a hamstring issue. Then we had the groin injury pop up, but he's back out there practicing and making plays. Actually had LaFleur say that he hit some speeds yesterday that were exciting to see. He's just a tough, rugged runner. I hope the speeds were exciting because Lord knows the next gen speeds from last year weren't exciting. I know everyone loves to talk about the Austin Eckler run, I think against the Packers. And yeah, guys, guess what though? Earlier in the year, Eckler actually hit a faster top speed than anything else that Jacobs managed to put up. And yeah, pick any efficiency stat. If you guys think Ezekiel Elliott's washed, I hope you guys aren't, concerned that Josh Jacobs had worse numbers than Zeke last season. So I fully understand. He had a foot out the door. He knew he wasn't going to be back with the Raiders. Certainly, didn't seem like the best, locker room, especially before Josh McDaniels got out there. But, Dwayne, when we start getting some of the praise from LaFleur, so excited he can do it all. He can be a weapon in the passing game, not only as a pass blocker, but also out of the backfield catching the ball. He's got great hands. That's all fine and nice. But this is also a guy who, if we really go back into LaFleur, era, fantastic play caller and everything, but there's a little bit more Arthur Smith here than I think people, would care to admit. I mean, this is the same guy that really split touches between Derrick Henry and Deion Lewis. AJ Dillon's had 200 plus touches in 3 straight seasons, despite, being AJ Dillon. So with Josh Jacobs, again, $48 million. But when you look a little bit closer at the contract, it really is more of a 1-year deal that they can keep going if they want to. You think Josh Jacobs deserves to be going, in third round of redraft? Because again, I don't think he's a dead zone running back necessarily, because his Packers offense should be pretty damn good. But there are some red flags here. And if it is a three-fledged, committee, I don't think that'd be the most surprising thing in the world, given LaFleur's history.
Yeah, this honestly is one of those quotes when I see it, I'm like, why are we even talking about this? Like this is all stuff we knew. We knew Josh Jacobs was hurt. We knew that Green Bay has a coaching staff that wants to rotate the backs. And so it's almost meaningless to me. Like, I mean, because like what are we supposed to take as the takeaway other than, oh, hey, he's healthy? Like, I care about that. We want to know that Josh Jacobs is back at practice, that he is healthy. But I don't take anything away from these quotes making me think that his role is going to be anything different than what we already thought, because we can also go and just look for other quotes from the coaching staff where they've said all offseason, to your point, Ian, that they know they like to use a committee and they're going to continue doing it. In the Matt LaFleur era, the largest adjusted market share, which accounts for games with injuries, 61% is the most that we've ever seen from a standpoint for the rush share for a running back on this team. And I've got Josh Jacobs projected just under that. The NFL average for a running back one on their team, not fantasy running back one, is 57%. So really LaFleur's right in line, with that. So that's where I've got it projected. I'm not really changing anything. The thing that I will say here, is the fact that with Jacobs, he does get a major upgrade in his offense, which we obviously already knew as well. And that's the biggest reason I think why people are willing to be back in a little bit on Josh Jacobs this year. You're not having to pay what you paid for him last year, but you're not getting him as cheap as you were in 2022. We really do like the Packers. And even though he may be in a timeshare, if he gets 60% of the carries in an ascending offense and he isn't taken off the field all the time on passing downs, which it sounds like he won't be, he's going to be mixed in there. Like, there's a chance Josh Jacobs is a top 6 running back, even if he's inefficient, because we've talked about this. As much as we love for our backs to be efficient, it's not honestly a drive rate. It doesn't correlate to getting carries. Like, there are other things that don't go on our spreadsheet that these coaches care about. And that's why quite often we see guys that are not efficient continue getting the carries, not just one season after, multiple seasons after. And then we see other guys that were like, oh my God, this guy's one of the best running backs in the league. Why can't he ever get a full-time role? Yeah. There's things that are going on in practice that we don't see. And again, they're not in our spreadsheet. So I think, look, this is status quo for Josh Jacobs. I do think he's fine where he's going in drafts, but I think the biggest challenge, and it's a really good one that you brought up, Ian, is you can take Josh Jacobs. I don't know where he's going on ESPN right now. I have to pull up our ADP, but I know like best ball, like by heart, right? He's going around 5. Well, I can get Joe Mixon a full round later almost in round 6. So that's the problem with Josh Jacobs, is that I've got to take an inefficient back and an offense I like when I can get one of those, a round to 2 rounds later.
Pick 42 on ESPN right now. That's not bad, but 26 on Sleeper and Yahoo. That's the price where, again, really, just finishing up round 2, early round 3. Yeah, as Dwain said, eek. So still 26 years young. He has only 1 year removed from working as the NFL's leading rusher. Maybe it is a situation like Doug Martin, the muscle hamster, awesome first year, kind of falls off a bit and then comes back really strong, like nothing changed. Certainly not out on the guy, but yeah, also haven't exactly gone out of my way for it, because in those parts of the draft, again, disparity between him and Joe Mixon, James Cook, and Rashad White, I'm kind of fine taking the cheaper guy of the group, or more often, honestly, dipping my toes in the elite onesies, quarterback, tight end waters in that round 4, round 5 range. So those were the big 3 news items. But as always, we do have a couple more things to go over in our rapid fire news minute or 2. So with that in mind, guys, Saints still a bit banged up in their own rights. Rashid Shaheed and Kendre Miller still not practicing with hamstring injuries. In Rashid Shaheed's case, though, it does seem like it is a bit more precautionary. Before he had the injury, we were getting words that he was burning everybody at camp. So please, Shaheed, for all of our sakes, especially Cooter Doodles, get healthy soon. Christian Watson, I think Jaden Reed got banged up at practice, but didn't receive anything that note that, again, it is overly serious. Just Watson, again, on the ground for a bit. But keep an eye out, because Lord knows Green Bay and that suddenly stockpiled wide receiver room, guys like Dontavian Wicks and even Bo Melton could, if fast, become fantasy relevant, more fantasy relevant, I should say, in Wick's case, in a hurry. Rondale Moore, inflatable cast, got carted off the field, looks horrible. So, Ray McLeod now going to play that Cooper Kupp role in Atlanta. And by Cooper Kupp role, I just mean slot wide receiver. Chill out, everybody. But yeah, sucks on Rondale. Please get better soon. Treylon Burks also banged up. It really is, football back in the air here. So obviously expecting to step in if and when DeAndre Hopkins is going to miss any regular season time. We'll be monitoring that. But for right now, more and more targets going to one Calvin Ridley. Some depth chart news. Robbie Chosen, that's his name for the moment, is working out for the 49ers. Is that perhaps a sign of things to come? Stay tuned, but who knows when that is actually going to happen, because Adam Schefter did say there is no rush to trade Brandon Ayuk. No offer is wowing the 49ers so far, and quote-unquote Ayuk's leverage is smaller now after declining multiple strong contract offers. So again, Ayuk watch really gripping the nation like Panda Watch used to back in the day. We'll continue to keep you guys updated there. Mike Tomlin said there very much is a competition for QB1, but did say the team's official, unofficial depth chart did actually, it was very real with Russ as QB1. So that's what Tomlin said, who I think is a pretty trustworthy guy. But then we had Steelers reporter Jerry Dulac saying that there is, quote unquote, no competition between Russ and Fields. The plan is to sign Russ long term if, and that's a big if, he plays okay. So choose your fighter with that kind of, QB competition. I tend to think personally it is, maybe not a wide open competition, but hey, if Russ plays like he kind of has over the past 2 years, should be Fields before too long. Andy Reid said Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs starters will play roughly a quarter in the preseason action. So any fellow DFS DGens out there, keep an eye on that. And then, only other big note, it looks like DK Metcalf pulled a Myles Garrett and swung a helmet at his teammate during Seahawks practice. That man loves to get in fights, and it's kind of fun. But yeah, no fighting, please, just like Tommy Shelby said back in the day. So that's the news, everybody. And now a quick word for our friends over at Mike's Hard Lemonade. Hey, Fantasy Life fans, let me ask you a question. Was your day hard enough for a Mike's Hard Lemonade? Are you in a slow draft that just won't end? I actually am. I accidentally entered it. It's the only slow draft I'm in right now, and it's absolutely infuriating. Kind of makes sense right now because of all the Ayuk stuff going on, but still, make your freaking pick, people, okay? Anyway, were you one pick away from the perfect quarterback wide receiver stack, but also got sniped? Yeah, that's happened to me too. Living the fantasy life is hard, and Mike's Hard Lemonade is the reward for a hard-earned thirst. Reward yourself today. Go to www.mikeshard.com to find out where you can get Mike's nearest you. Refreshing. I like lemonade. You like lemonade? I like alcohol. You like alcohol? Combine them. Guess what? It's pretty freaking awesome, people. Hard days deserve a hard lemonade. All right, Dwain, it is wide receiver week after all. And now it is Thursday, which means we got some tiers to break down. You had your lovely wide receiver tiers go up on the website, I think a week or two ago. And I know in your intro, you just talked about really feeling more prepared than any past year to just kind of get your tiers out, get your rankings out. And good, man, because a lot of us out there happen to think you're a pretty smart dude. So we trust you with our lives, which, in this case is our fantasy football draft. So looking at your tiers, man, obviously some baller wide receivers at the top, but CeeDee Lamb is in a tier of his own. Obviously, still holding out a Cowboys camp, although we have received some, murmurs that they're moving forward. I know Ricky was saying, I think last week, that the deal should be done before too long. So CD, tier of his own. There's also Christian McCaffrey now dealing with this calf issue. That's not really expected to cause any missed regular season time, but not ideal. What formats are you taking CeeDee Lamb over Christian McCaffrey, if any, in terms of PPR, half PPR, 2 wide receivers, 3 wide receivers? When are you taking CeeDee Lamb one-on-one?
Well, I had him ranked number 1, and I moved him back to number 2 just because the holdout's still going on.
Okay.
So that's the only thing keeping him from being number 1 in my PPR and half PPR formats. I think, honestly, with a little bit of a calf concern with Christian McCaffrey, and he's a running back that's getting older, like we're not going to drop CMC way down the ranks, but I think now, like with him having a question as well, maybe I should just move Lamb right back to number 1. Ideally, we wish that neither one of the top 2 picks on the board had any sort of questions at all. But Lamb does, other than the holdout, belong in a tier of his own, because if you go look at the tier methodology, the things that are most likely to help us predict what's going to happen the next season, obviously fantasy points matter. We know CeeDee Lamb's already shown us that he's a wide receiver 1. Last year was a high-end wide receiver 1, putting up elite fantasy production. He's got the underlying talent profile. So all those things we like to look at, Ian, like can they earn targets, yards per route run, air yard share, all those sort of things. And that's essentially what you're doing when you're doing this work. You're looking to see, did they score fantasy points? We know that correlates the most to future success, but then you're looking for, okay, is there a reason like this number might go up or down? Was there something weird
Mhm.
that happened in the player's favor? Or maybe something weird that really went against the player's favor, like a quarterback getting injured, those sort of things. And that's basically saying, okay, do we think these fantasy points from the year before were real or not? And the talent profile is absolutely huge for wide receivers, much more so than running backs. Like talent matters the most at the wide receiver position as far as the skill players go. CeeDee Lamb obviously has all that stuff in spades. Age, he's in his prime. He's in the 3-year window when most wide receivers historically have had their best seasons. So CeeDee Lamb
Yeah.
checks that box as well. And then obviously he plays in a good offense. We love Dak Prescott. We know that he's capable of supporting high-end fantasy production for more than one weapon when he has them. But right now, I mean, it's really just Lamb and Ferguson's maybe the only potential challenger here. So not a lot of target competition. I know we're getting a little bit of Jalen Tolbert kind of love out of camp. Brandon Cooks is there, but those guys, those are tertiary players. So there's really not
Right.
anyone else there to try and get the ball to. So when you put all that together, it's like, okay, like he literally checks every single box that we want for a wide receiver. And that's the reason he belongs in a tier of his own. We just need this contract thing done, Jerry. Come on, Jerry. Let's get the contract settled.
Like if there's anyone to, I don't want to say if there's anyone because Parsons, CD, and Dak, obviously great players known, right? But I'm with you, man. Like if you're not going to give CeeDee Lamb a long-term deal, what wide receiver are you going to give a long-term deal? Like, okay, I'll give Justin Jefferson the credit for being wide receiver one in real life NFL. But man, just you said it, man. There really is not a hole to pick out in CeeDee's game. So league high 179 targets last year. And honestly, man, he looks okay at running back. And the Cowboys have given him, various chances over the years to handle that work as well. 14 carries last season. I mean, there is a chance that we do see CD rack up 200 plus combined carries and targets. I mean, he was only 7 away from completing that goal last year after all. So 13 straight games with at least 100 yards or a touchdown, Dwain. I mean, when we look at those like next gen route maps after Cowboys games, I mean, CD and Tyreek are up there where it literally reminds me of those old like National Geographic mazes where it's just stuff flying everywhere on the screen. So I know there was some concern about, Mike McCarthy taking over for Kellen Moore. What would this offense look like? Are they just going to run, slant flat every single play? But no, man, they did a great job at really making CD the engine of the offense. And honestly, he rewarded fantasy managers with that wide receiver one finish. So CD, yeah, very much in play as the wide receiver one. If the cap is completely good, Dwayne, if the, again, contract situation gets figured out here in the next week, your home league, 3 wide receiver, PPR, CD or CMC, who are you taking?
Lamb. I'll do it in a 2 wide
Yeah.
receiver.
Oh,
But I mean, it's obviously a little bit more questionable to do it there. Taking the running back can be more valuable, but I just feel like the risk you take on with a running back versus Lamb, and the fact that it's easier to find wide receiver or to find running backs off the waiver wire later in the season than it is wide receivers because of what we just talked about, how important talent is to unlocking fantasy points. You can't just run somebody out on the field, and because they get routes, they're going to score points as a fantasy receiver, right? You can say that for running back, like to different levels, but if you put a running back on the field, they're going to score some fantasy points. So I think when you put all that together, that's what makes me want to take Lamb, first overall. I will ask you this though: is there a point where you start to really get worried and you would start to move CeeDee Lamb down your board? We know guys that miss camp, especially at running back, not quite as much at wide receiver, but there can be conditioning issues. There can be timing issues
yeah.
with their quarterback. Would there come a point where if the holdout's not over that you would start to move Lamb down your board?
If we're knocking on the
Stumped
door
Ian.
of week
Stumped Ian.
one, I know, man, you got me. I'm pretty confident that this is not going to go longer than a week or two. I don't have any inside sources that are telling me that or anything like that. Be a lot cooler if I did, obviously,
Been
but
talking to Ricky.
no, yeah, no, not yet, but we'll see what happens in future years. Probably not. Maybe Tyreek, but then once we start getting the Chase and Sun God and Justin Jefferson, like I don't know that CD's again, just brief holdout problem is going to be bigger than the smallish redder flags that we have with those guys as well. So Tyreek versus CD, I think is fair because again, like if we had to say who has the best chance of gaining 2,000 receiving yards this year, I'd probably even give the edge to Tyreek there. But CD, I still think the situation is just too perfect to overly worry about it. But hopefully, Dwayne, we get this figured out soon, so we don't have to continue worrying about that potential hellhole that the Cowboys have figured out for themselves. So
I think
again,
you're right
CeeDee
though. It's
Lamb,
Tyreek or Chase would be the two you might consider taking over Lamb if like this
yeah.
holdout continued another 2 weeks. Like once you get to
But,
Jefferson, I
yeah.
think you have a more red flag in quarterback play.
But again, I just think even Higgins and Waddle also sharing the offense with those guys like that. It's that competition. Like that is what I said, the red-ish flag that we have for those guys. So it's, are you okay with, there being more of a 1B in those offenses or CeeDee's actual holdout? Personally, I'll just go ahead and keep betting on CeeDee there. So again, you're only tier 1 wide receiver, Tyreek, Chase, Sun God in tier 2. Tier 3, Justin Jefferson, AJ Brown, Puka Nakua, maybe a little bit down. I know you put this out before the injury happened there, but
Yeah.
once we get out into a stacked tier 4, Garrett Wilson, Marvin Harrison Jr., Drake London, and rounding it out, Chris Olave, wide receiver 11, overall. And Dwayne, I know we were just, messaging a couple weeks ago, and you kind of brought up that, again, if you're using those almost like 4 pillars for wide receiver evaluation, a talented guy, an offense without much target competition, we want a really good quarterback under center, and then also we want a situation where, we're not exactly facing any age or injury cliffs. Chris Olave is not as clear as CeeDee Lamb. There's a reason why he's wide receiver 11 and not wide receiver 1. But again, if you had to find almost like a middle class man's version of CeeDee Lamb, sure as hell looks a lot like Chris Olave.
Yeah, I mean, Garrett Wilson is my closest comp to what CeeDee Lamb was going into the season last year. I think Garrett Wilson could make the leap CeeDee Lamb made, right? But
Yeah.
my honorable mention went to Chris Olave. And it's just because of all the things that we talk about that you want to work through. Number one, like he's already shown us that he's a wide receiver 3 and a wide receiver 2 over the last 2 seasons with 13.4 and 14.3 fantasy points per game. So that's a positive thing. This is a young player entering his prime. We also had Derek Carr. You got to kind of dig a little bit on some of these things, really battling those shoulder injuries and concussions last season. So if you take away those games where Carr got knocked out of the game, and then the games right after those where he was still playing through the injury. And so when I say the games after, not the concussions, but the shoulder issues, like in those games, like he only averaged 184 yards per game. If you take away those games, he averaged 250 per game. Prescott over the last 2 years is 252. So really to help bolster like a wide receiver 1, if we can get to that like 250 to 260 range, you don't have to be a 300-yard passer, especially when there's low target competition. We both really love Rashid Shaheed in this offense, but like obviously we don't look at him as being someone that would just take away all these targets from Olave. Like they can both coexist, and we like Olave over Rashid Shaheed. So with Derek Carr healthy, and then you get the addition of Clint Kubiak, who's going to bring more play action to this offense, going to bring more motion. So if you look at what Kubiak's done in his previous stops, obviously last year with the 49ers and Kyle Shanahan, but even the year before that when he was the offensive coordinator for the Minnesota Vikings, he did a lot of really positive things that I think are going to unlock a little bit more efficiency for this group of wide receivers. We've talked about it in the past, Ian, the edge that the scheme can be 55% more on routes and in PPR scoring on routes with motion at the snap than on plays without it. And then if you look at, play action, not quite as high as that, but also an edge for the wide receivers. So I think those are things that you're going to get for Olave this year. I think you're also going to see more 2 wide receiver sets, which just helps reduce the funnel. Less people that you've got to throw the ball to. A slot wide receiver, is typically, tougher to deal with from a target competition than some of the tight ends we're going to see on the field. So looking at all those things, I think there is a true chance that we finally get a wide receiver 1 finish from Chris Olave this year. So I love taking him anywhere in round 2. I'm not taking him in early round 2, but once you get to middle round 2 to the end of round 2, I think that Chris Olave is a really great pick in fantasy.
You mentioned the Derek Carr injuries, and it really was an ongoing problem throughout the year. He initially suffered the AC joint sprain in September, and then on November 12th, he had another shoulder injury and a grade 1 concussion. Then December 3rd, he had another concussion and also another AC joint sprain. So him and Trevor Lawrence last year really banged up. Kudos to both guys for largely playing through the pain throughout the entire season. So looking at our, again, lovely consensus rank, so you can find over at FantasyLife.com. Let's see, I have Chris Olave, wide receiver 10. Dwain has him, again, wide receiver 11, Waz and Friedman around that point as well. So again, pretty hard to rank, more than 12, 13 guys ahead of Chris Olave. And accordingly, he again is in a tier with some fellow clear-cut number 1 wide receivers who we do believe in their talent, like Garrett, Marv, and Drake London. So like that tier a lot, Dwain. And just, hopefully we can get a bit better connection in year 2. We've seen Derek Carr flirt with some pretty damn good efficiency over the years, man. Like I know those Gruden and Carr teams weren't exactly exactly, just racking up playoff wins. In fact, they just lost that one game, the Bengals, and that was it, obviously. But again, like we had Carr averaging 7.9, 8 yards per attempt in each of those 3 seasons with Gruden. Like, I don't think it's impossible for Carr to kind of flirt with a better case overall outcome, similar to, Kirk Cousins, Matthew Stafford having some of these career years. So certainly think Derek Carr, is lower on the quarterback rankings than those guys. Don't get it twisted. But hey, I mean, CJ Stroud and Derek Carr led the NFL in games with 300 plus passing yards last year. That happened. We'll see what happens in 2024 and beyond. Dwayne, if there's one team I know you love talking about, it's the Philadelphia Eagles. And, the reasons make a lot of sense. Bringing in Kellen Moore, you look at the offense last year, so stagnant, dead last in motion. I mean, Eagles fans know it as well as we do. It was rough watching, again, just the basic play design all season long. And guess what? It still worked out more times than not because A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith are freaking ballers. But looking at this offense, like if you had to kind of just look at, again, a group that everyone perceives as a top 10 ranked kind of unit in the NFL. But if there is one of those, more middling, ranked closer to 10 than 1 units that could all of a sudden we look up in week 8 and it's, oh my gosh, this is number 1 ranked scoring offense in the NFL. I feel like that could be the Philadelphia Eagles. And accordingly, A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith both cracking your top 20, AJB wide receiver 6, Devonta wide receiver 19. I mean, how high are your expectations here? Are you trying to come away with one of these guys in each and every draft?
Pretty much. I want to draft as many Eagles as I can. Jalen Hurts, like he goes a tad early, like on some of these sites like Yahoo, where it's really tough because, there's some of the quarterbacks you can wait on. But in the leagues where Jalen Hurts, like right now on Underdog, where you can get Jalen Hurts in round 4, I think that we could end up looking back at that and thinking that it's completely criminal compared, given what the opportunity costs turn into in that round and some of the guys you're passing for Jalen Hurts. I'm very willing to do it. But yeah, man, I want both of these wide receivers. I don't mind drafting them both, even on the same team. Of course, then I'm really trying to get Jalen Hurts onto the squad. But you mentioned it. It's just look, it's 2 really good players first, right? The talent is there. That has to be the number one thing. And these are both 2 really good wide receivers. I think A.J. Brown, there's an argument in that he's one of the 3 or 4 best wide receivers in the NFL. And that if he played, on another team that had been throwing for 4,500 yards per game, like some of these other guys, or 4,500 yards per game, that would be a ton. 4,500 yards per season. Like if he played with a quarterback like a Patrick Mahomes, like he could possibly be the wide receiver 1 right now in fantasy. Like he's that good. He has the talent profile to match up with these other guys. When you look at all the underlying data, the challenge has been, he is having to split with another really good player. And then when you were in the stagnant offense, which you mentioned, then that just makes things tough. So basically, these guys weren't getting any of the treatment that the guys in Miami and San Francisco are getting, where they're getting to move all over the formation. They're in motion at the snap. They're getting hidden. They're getting put into situations where they're in these closer splits to the line of scrimmage so that they can make their break either way on option routes. All these things you really want to allow your best players to do. The Eagles weren't doing any of them. They were just not doing any of them. And so Kellen Moore has actually got a history of showing that. And he did a great job last year with Keenan Allen. 59% of the time he had a player in motion at the snap, and that ranks 6th in the NFL. And if you look at Keenan Allen, he was in motion at the snap 28% of his routes. That was the second highest mark in the NFL. So I can't tell you for sure, like, is that all going to go to AJB or go to Devonta Smith? I think it's going to get spread out across both of them. I have been monitoring Kellen Moore's comments through the offseason, and he has talked about really mixing it up, letting all these guys get into motion. But the bottom line is, if they get motion even just a little bit more, right, that's a little bit more of an edge. So if I were to pick, like I think A.J. Brown is the guy you would want to do it more with, just because of what he can do after the catch. And that motion stuff gives them space. So imagine what Tyreek Hill is getting to do, and you suddenly get some of those looks for A.J. Brown. I will say Devonta Smith stylistically is more like a Keenan Allen, right? He's going to win more via his route running. He's a good separator, those sort of things. Obviously, Keenan has deteriorated a little bit, as he's gotten older, but I like this for both of the players. I also like it for Dallas Goedert. Like, I think Dallas Goedert is the most underpriced tight end in fantasy. So, yeah, I'm in on all of these Eagles. And the last thing to mention here, there's also just a chance, Ian, we get to see them throw the ball more. If you look at the drop back rate over expectation for the Eagles, it was -1%, 19th in the NFL last year. If you look at Kellen Moore, it was 4%. So they were in the top 5. And Kellen Moore has had a history of being on offenses that have passed the ball a little bit more. There were some years there with the Cowboys where it wasn't like, as maybe pedal to metal as some people think. But I think there is a chance for a slight uptick in passing volume as well. So when you put it all together, man, it's hard for me to find a way to not be all in on all of the Eagles passing game options. A little more, have some concerns about Saquon Barkley, but not the pass catchers.
AJB coming in as the consensus wide receiver 6 in our rankings. Devonta Smith, again, a little bit further down, not too far, but ultimately, well, my wide receiver 21, Dwain's wide receiver 19, 21, and 23 from Waz and Friedman as well. So I'm 100% with you on Goddard. He's my second most drafted tight end of the offseason so far. And honestly, Dwain, like one small thing to keep an eye on right now, we've been getting a lot of love for Johnny Wilson out of camp, who again is a 6'7" rookie, third day, day 3 pick and everything, not expecting him to take any targets from these guys. But Johnny Wilson, I would be very surprised if he's, the one going to the slot. If he ends up getting that starting job, and then that actually leads to more inside usage for AJB and Devonta versus someone like Paris Campbell getting the job, who I think is much more, ingrained as the inside guy, could be good news for both of them. So really last year, I mean, Devonta had 273 snaps in the slot. AJ Brown had 259. I do tend to agree with Dwain where it should be pretty spread out, because I will say, Dwain, if we're sitting here though after week 1 and all of a sudden Devonta has the full-time role in the slot and AJB is kind of sticking to the outside, all of a sudden, are we kind of making them just almost neck and neck in the wide receiver 2 range? Like, is that alone important enough to you where if Devonta does win the job, and you said it, probably a bit more stylistically similar to Keenan Allen, is that a situation where maybe we should be just really going out of our way for Devonta? Because he is someone where I think, AJB doesn't have much more room to go. You could call him a top
Right.
3 wide receiver, fine. But if Devonta gets that job, man, he goes from wide receiver 19 to wide receiver 10 potentially in a hurry.
Yeah, Devonta is the guy that you have the most to gain out of this change because of where he's going right now from an ADP perspective. I guess you could look at it the other way. If AJ Brown got all of that, then Devonta might be more of a wide receiver 3. I mean, there's a potential of that as well, but definitely from an upside perspective, getting Devonta where he's going right now in drafts, he could drastically outperform that. And whenever you look at a lot of the sites that, most everybody's going to be playing on, like ESPN, on Yahoo, on Sleeper, the price tag on Devonta is very, very reasonable. So I do think that there's a ton of upside there. And again, I don't mind drafting both of the players. And I don't say that about a ton of teams, but I really don't mind doing it with the Eagles.
Appreciate you always giving the, level-headed rational take when I get a bit too carried away, Dwain. It's easy to say what if, any of these guys are going to completely ball out. There's also the what if, things maybe don't go quite as great as we are expecting. So still plenty of tier talk on the way, guys. But first, a quick word on our friends over at DraftKings. Whether you've been watching your favorite team from the screen at home or the ballpark in the stands, there's an even better way to get in on the action. Check out our partners over at DraftKings Sportsbook. New customers who bet $5 will instantly get $150 back in bonus bets. All you got to do is download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now and use our promo code FantasyLife. Again, $5 will instantly get $150 back in bonus bets. Preseason football is here finally. Cannot wait to be betting on that. MLB parlays and, of course, some fight night action in the UFC world on Saturdays. Great days to be great all around. And hey, if sports betting is not yet available in your state, don't worry. Their DFS grid is fantastic. Their best ball offerings are a lot of fun. You can even catch Dwain and myself on Friday mornings right here on the Fantasy Life YouTube page, breaking down, again, a DraftKings best ball draft. So love our friends over there. Again, download DraftKings Sportsbook app now. Use our code FantasyLife. And remember, the crown is yours. All right, Dwain, your tier 11 is featuring some wide receiver 1s and then overqualified wide receiver 2s. But the wide receiver 1s are in offenses where, we have more red flags than just, completely just fantasy nirvana with Dak Prescott, Josh Allen throwing them the football. So Michael Pittman, T. Higgins, Amari Cooper, Christian Kirk, Terry McLaurin, Marquise Brown, and Keenan Allen is that tier 11. So out of that group, who is your favorite and least favorite at cost? I mean, who have you been drafting the most? Who have you been getting to and just saying, not for me?
Well, I mean, it comes down to price. So Terry McLaurin, is one of the cheaper out of this group. But there's obviously concerns. We don't know what Jaden Daniels is going to do. So if I had to pick my favorite, I haven't necessarily drafted this player the most because they go a little bit earlier, and there's some running backs and tight ends in that range that I really like as well. But I do think that you have to lean to T. Higgins as being the one that, like, if he suddenly did have a wide receiver 1 kind of season and the offense consolidated down to where it's really just about him and Jamar Chase, which is totally possible. Yeah, I know that we love Yoshi Voss. I know that we've talked about Jermaine Burton. They've talked about the tight ends. We've got a lot of different things going on there. But at the end of the day, when I really look at this roster, like I have to really squint to see a major role for any of those guys. And I think this could all be about Jamar Chase and T. Higgins playing with an alpha quarterback, man, because that's what Joe Burrow is. Last year, if you look at Joe Burrow's healthy games, when you get rid of the calf strain, the issue that kept him, down for basically the first 4 weeks of the season, still averaged 22.2 fantasy points per game. Like he was out there slinging the rock. So T. Higgins is a guy, we just need him to stay healthy, Ian. That's really been the bigger issue for, T. Higgins. It was an issue last year. But if we look at the games where he was at least over a 60% route participation, he averaged 14.1 fantasy points. He had a 20% target share. Like I could see him having a wide receiver one season if the Bengals offense just went completely nuclear. So I would say it's him. I will say this: T. Higgins looks more like Mike Williams, honestly, like as a talent profile, but he's in his prime. He has had to play through injuries. So I do think that there's this side to him that we have seen like really kind of emerge at times, especially, whenever we've had issues with Jamar Chase being injured, where T has shown that maybe he does have more than that. So if somehow in a world where it all just consolidated around those two wide receivers, which I think is reasonable, like there would be a chance that we should be thinking really about T. Higgins the same way we just talked about Devonta Smith, right? Now, he doesn't get the same scheme advantages because Zach Taylor is like a doofus when it comes to that stuff. Like no, everybody just go line up. I got Joe Burrow. I'm just going to like go play golf. I don't know if he plays golf. I don't know what he does, but he should be getting really good sleep because he's not putting anything into making the offense like, use play action or motion at the snap, all that kind of stuff. But T. Higgins is the guy, and I would say that mostly ties to Burrow. I think Pittman is the guy that people are taking first, which I get. But the problem is I just don't like – I wish Pittman was a round 4 pick. I don't want to take Pittman, in round 2 or 3 of fantasy drafts. Now, over on ESPN, some of these other sites where folks, are drafting, you do get Pittman falling a little bit further down. So if he and T were completely priced the same, I still think I would take Pittman over T. Higgins, but I think Higgins offers the better upside. How about you?
Higgins, wide receiver 12 in 2021, wide receiver 19 in 2022. And that included a couple of those, 1 or 5 snap games where if you take those out, you really end up having wide receiver 1 numbers. Yeah, I think Higgins stands out here, man. Like the reason his ADP is this low, I think, is from some of the off-season speculation that he was going to be traded or he was going to be a holdout candidate. I mean, this time last year, we had Waddle, Devonta, and Higgins basically going alongside each other as, top 15 options. Now, all of a sudden, Higgins is the one getting the wide receiver 3 shaft, despite not even having Tyler Boyd to worry about anymore. I'm with you, T. Higgins, best at cost in this tier. Dwayne, am I not drafting Keenan Allen enough? Because that is the guy that I've kind of been passing the most in this tier. I just think Rome Odunze could outperform him, and Rome is usually, quite a bit cheaper. We do have the new offense. We do have, again, some red flags when it comes to his age. I understand Keenan was awesome last year, #1 open score from ESPN, wide receiver freaking 3 in fantasy. But Keenan Allen, how far out of your way are you going to draft him usually?
I'm kind of like you. The challenge is I can get Romo Dunze around to multiple rounds later.
Yeah.
And so that makes it challenging because I think early on, I think it's going to be a challenge probably for Rome. But as the season goes, I think that we'll see Romo Dunze really come on. And I think there's a chance that he's going to win the wide receiver 2 role in base sets, right? When they're not using 11 personnel, that could hurt Keenan Allen. But I am with you. I still have the same fear. I mean, we're talking about a guy that he averaged 21.1 fantasy points per game last year. He had a 32% target share. Now, he is going from Kellen Moore to Shane Waldron. Like, if there's someone I like less than Zach Taylor as an offensive play caller, it's probably Shane Waldron. Like, I would say, like, they're kind of like tied. They're both right there together. And we saw what Shane Waldron did last year whenever he had DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, and JSN. Like, he just kind of, like, pissed everybody off. So we'll see what happens with the coordinator, but there are enough red flags here that as much as I love, what Keenan did last year with the age and everything else, and it is a rookie quarterback, we're not sorry producer swing. Like we're not for sure the Bears offense, is going to have, a passer that can support all these guys. Like we're leaning into it right now, but we've also acknowledged that, it can be rough, with the rookie quarterback, depending on how things are for Caleb. So yeah, Keenan's a guy that I'm with you. I haven't clicked on him as much. I've been trying to take a little bit more of him because, like, to his credit, he was really good last year.
Yeah. We'll see if he can keep it going. But again, yeah, not the cleanest profile, certainly for someone that you still got to take, usually with a top 30 pick, more drafts than not. Moving down the tiers, Wayne, we get to tier 13. So now it's time for America's favorite game: cut, stream, and marry Deontay Johnson, Calvin Ridley, and Chris Godwin. I will say personally, I'd be cutting Chris Godwin. Just don't have the same level of belief, I guess, in him as the clear 1B. Whereas I think Deontay Johnson, who I would stream, and I would marry Calvin Ridley, got a lot of dollars and just less target competition than what Godwin is dealing with in the form of Mike Evans. So cut, stream, marry Dwain, Deontay Johnson, Calvin Ridley, Chris Godwin.
Yeah, I'm gonna make the same cut as with Chris Godwin. Got Mike Evans still there. We've got a guy that's not scoring a lot of touchdowns for multiple years in a row now. Not as good after the catch as he used to be. So, and Baker, like we have questions about Baker. Like, can Baker even repeat what he did last year? Like that's not a given at all. So those are enough concerns for me with Chris Godwin. I like him where he goes in drafts, but out of this trio, I'm cutting Chris Godwin. Calvin Ridley would be the player that I would stream. Major questions about Will Levis as well. Obviously, we've got questions about quarterbacks across the board here. I see what you did, Mr. Hartitz. But yeah, I do agree that Ridley right now is the wide receiver 1. We do know that DeAndre Hopkins is getting older. I put him in the age article. Concerns about injuries over the last few years, and now he's hurt, right? And out 4 to 6 weeks with the injury that he has today. So there is a chance that this offense consolidates around Calvin Ridley, because I'm not worried about Tyler Boyd. Chigo Okonkwo is a nice player, but he's not gonna be someone to worry about if you're Ridley. So there is really this chance that, like, the alpha, if you will, for the Titans, we could see a 25% target share for Calvin Ridley this year. And if Will Levis takes a step forward, that's great. The guy that I'm marrying, though, is Deontay Johnson, because he has proven year over year that he is a wide receiver 1 as a target earner. Now, it hasn't always equaled fantasy points. We did get that one year where he had a wide receiver 8 finish 3 seasons ago. So we know that we've seen that ceiling from him. And to be fair, Deontay's done this without ever really playing with a good quarterback. He had the end of career Ben Roethlisberger, then he had Kenny Pickett. He's had Mason Rudolph. He's never really had, honestly, even good quarterback play to help support him. So is that really going to be any different, even if Bryce Young struggles this year? But there is a chance Bryce Young, the number 1 overall pick the year before, does take a big step forward. I talked about that in my quarterback tiers article. You guys can go check that out. But I looked at all of the quarterbacks that, had a really bad year 1 as being one of the top picks in the NFL draft, and then looked at what their teams did in the offseason. And then what did that mean the next year? And there's a lot of really good examples on there of guys that were just absolutely terrible, like Trevor Lawrence, Carson Wentz, guys like that, where the team made major upgrades and they took big steps forward. Now, they didn't turn into fantasy. They didn't all turn into fantasy superstars for starting quarterbacks, but they turned into players that actually were good enough to support the players around them. So there were still a lot of things I liked about Bryce Young coming out, and I still think there's a really good chance that he's going to be a quality NFL starter. So because of those things, I will marry Deontay Johnson.
Hopefully Dave Canales, save some whispers, from turning around Geno Smith and Baker and has some left for Bryce Young. So last thing, Dwain, again, you got this full tier article is available for free over at FantasyLife.com. Encourage everyone to check it out, because tier-based drafting, in my opinion, is the best way to go about things in your fantasy draft. But we got tiers 15 through 17. 15, Curtis Samuel, Cortland Sutton, Tyler Lockett. 16, Josh Palmer, Rashid Shaheed, Khalil Shakur, Romeo Dobbs. 17, Mike Williams, Jacoby Myers, and Brandon Cook. So out of those, 8 or 9 names, who have you been drafting most?
It's been Shaheed for me. These are all really close. I think you should be mixing these guys. But over the last 2 seasons, if you look at the games where he's played at least 70% of the routes, because he's been a part-time player, so we've got to narrow it down to, okay, when he actually got on the field, and he's had 7 of those games, he had a 20% target share, and he averaged 12 fantasy points per game. All right. So a 1.95 yards per route run over his career. So that's wide receiver 2 worthy if we're talking about a talent profile. It's a limited sample. These things can go wrong, but they can also really go right. And so when I look at the offense and I look at the fact that Olave is really the only other significant target competition, I don't think there's another wide receiver here on the roster like A.T. Perry. I don't think he's necessarily going to push Shaheed. We just need to make sure that the hamstring thing is okay. I know right now he's sidelined with that. Doesn't sound like it's too serious. But as long as he's back on the field here pretty quickly, Shaheed is the guy that I am drafting the most out of this group.
Number 1, Dwain, not 2, not 3, number 1 in yards per target over the past 2 seasons among all players with at least 100 targets. And I know nerds out there yelling at me about yards per target not being the best stat for wide receivers. I get it, but the man
nerds like Dwain
has made the most. Yeah, I know. He's made the most out of his opportunities. Man, he was a first-team All-Pro returner. You know, Bengals fans, you guys remember him dicing up your defense on that fly sweep a couple years ago. Like, he is certifiably good at football. Michael Thomas is gone. They did not add any competition, with all respect to Bub Means and his family and everything. But 79% route rate, Dwayne, after Michael Thomas was lost for the season last year. It's Chris Olave, it's Rashid Shaheed. And again, if we see Carr with the Kubiak influence taking a bit of a step forward, yeah, I do think this offense can have not one, but two very fantasy relevant wide receivers. Draft Rashid Shaheed. If you have one takeaway from this podcast, just please, injury gods, make sure that hamstring is okay. So great stuff, Dwayne. Again, you guys can find all of his tiers and rankings over at FantasyLife.com. We invite you to check out Fantasy Life Plus again for just a bunch of cool tools that will help make you smarter and hopefully accordingly help win those fantasy championships. So we'll be right back on the Fantasy Life Show tomorrow, actually getting Coach Speak Index himself to come on and talk through some of the biggest position battles ahead of the preseason. So make sure you guys don't miss that one. And otherwise, yeah, like, subscribe, if you want to. It's a free country after all. But more than anything, have a great rest of your day. So for Dwayne, for producer Matt, for producer Kelsey, I'm Ian. Thanks again for tuning into the Fantasy Life Show. And until next time, take care, everybody.